MKE600 is a shotgun microphone ideal for professional video camera applications. Maximal rejection of ambient side noises thanks to pronounced directivity. And because the MKE600 has a very good suppression of structure-borne noise, it makes one of the most versatile all-round shotgun microphones on the market.
The new Super 35 sensor that Canon have introduced with the C500 Mark III is quite a big step up from other S35 sensors that they have created before. From the body and the flexibility that gives us in terms of the expansion packs and the interchangeable mount, to the sensor with its increased dynamic range for tackling scenes that possibly we couldn't have tackled or captured faithfully before, I can get more out of this camera. My money goes further. It's as simple as that from a business standpoint. From a creative point of view, it's unquestionably unlocking more creative avenues for us as filmmakers.
XS Wireless Digital is the perfect wireless audio solution for content creators and filmmakers. Thanks to a 2.4 GHz transmission, XS Wireless Digital is a truly plug-and-play system that allows you to upgrade your in-camera audio with one-button operation. With a variety of configurations to choose from, this entry point into the world of wireless will improve your workflow and will expand the possibilities of how you capture audio for your video. For more information, visit sennheiser.com/xswd.
Okay, welcome to ProAV Live. I am joined today by Mehdia from Canon. Say hi, Mehdia. How are you?
I'm good. Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for joining us.
You had a good weekend, Mehdia?
Definitely, yeah.
Excellent.
Relaxing, trying to catch up with the things.
But yeah, catch up with actual life. Yeah.
With the actual life, yeah.
Right, so today we are talking about the C500 Mark II, a camera that I'm sure most people will be familiar with. It was one that was launched just before we started all these live streams, so we haven't done much content with it as a live stream just yet, hence the idea behind this one. We're also trying to go back and cover more products that aren't instantly the latest thing that hit the market. But I mean, I sort of class the C500 as one of the latest. I know you've released the C300 Mark II since then, but the C500 Mark II wasn't exactly a long time ago. It's still very much a new and exciting camera, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, we announced it IBC last year in September, so it's still very new camera. And I think because of the lockdown, we haven't been able to do as many events and getting the camera out there for people to test it and try and use it. And then came April, and then there was a C300 Mark III. So it's still, I think it's C500 is probably playing catch up with the focus is on a C300 Mark III at the moment, but there are still people out there that wants to know more about the C500 Mark II to even try it before they consider whether it's the right camera for them or not.
Absolutely, and I think that's what a lot of the interesting discussion between both the C300 Mark II and the C500 Mark, sorry, the C300 Mark III and the C500 Mark II is the differences between them, which type of work is better suited for one, because they're very similar cameras, but at the same time they do fit into their own little niche quite nicely and are better for each different sort of work. So I think that is a very interesting thing to talk about. Or maybe get onto that towards the end of the stream. But for the most part, the way that this is going to work, everyone, is that we've got a simple product overview presentation, which Mehdia is going to give us a run through. And I can see all the chat that's going on here on the laptop next to me. So I'll bring up any questions that are immediately relevant for that slide, if you like. But for the most part, I'll save most questions until the end, and then we'll do a sort of Q&A session at the end of this. Yep. And the stream might last half an hour, depending on how much questions there are and how quickly we rattle through this. Should we just get stuck into it, Mehdia?
Yeah, let's get started.
Okay,
so as Carl mentioned, we'll be talking about the C500 Mark II. Even though we literally just over a month ago, we launched the C300 Mark III, the C500 Mark II is still a very new camera, new addition to the Cinema EOS range, a full frame Cinema EOS camera. Previously, we only had the C700 full frame, but now the second camera in the range is the C500 Mark II. Just to give you an overview of the main features. So as I said, it's a full frame 5.9K CMOS sensor with a powerful Digic processor, as we usually do with our cameras, Digic DV7. The camera itself is small, lightweight, and compact design as well. 5.9K oversampling. So again, talking about the oversampling to produce the 4K DCI, UHD, 2K, and even Full HD. In-camera raw recording, so cinema raw light internally. So this is the second camera after the C200 to have that flexibility. The modular design, which is what everyone loves about this camera, and having the option to expand it using different extension units. User interchangeable mounts. So this is the first camera to offer that. Electronic IS, again, first in the Cinema EOS cameras to offer that, and 12G SDI support. So one cable rather than 4.
Say is the things on this list that make this stand up above the others as the flagship in that little trio lineup that you guys have got going on. I know there's the C700 above it, which is a very different camera ergonomically.
Yeah.
But in the 3 cameras that share the same sort of body design as their own little lineup in the middle, if you like, the Cinema EOS lineup, there's the C200, the C500 Mark II, and then this. What features on this do you think stand out to make this the flagship there?
Full frame, definitely. 5.9K, the resolution itself, even for those that don't need the 5.9K, the fact that it uses that to produce the 4K, the 2K and Full HD, you will see a massive difference. This will be one of the differences if you're comparing the 4K out of a C500 and a 4K out of the C300 Mark III. Because with the oversampling on this camera, you'll see the difference in resolution. I think that now with the 300, they actually have quite a lot in common as well. So it's a tough one. Yeah. But I think the main one, I would say,
the raw recording, the mounts, the IS, that's all shared pretty much across the line now. Whereas the definitely between the 500 Mark II and the C300 Mark III.
I would say the full frame, and as I said, the 5.9K oversampling. The full frame, you do have the flexibility. I mean, full frame with full frame lenses to get that really nice depth of field as well. The look that you get, the cinematic look that you get with a full frame. But if you want Super 35, you have the option to get down to Super 35. So it does give you that flexibility. That's why I think initially when we introduced this camera, I always used to say that this is probably the most flexible cinema camera we have in the range, because it covers all bases in terms of full frame if you need it. You can use it for, again, broadcast documentaries. We've got Super 35. And then if you need the high frame rate, you have the Super 16, so 2K.
So there's a little bit of chat going on about availability and things like that, an announcement. So the availability of that lineup, obviously the C200 has been available for years now. The C500 Mark II was announced the end of last year and has been shipping from the beginning of this year, from January. And so there's lots of them out there. Yeah. It's very much available. You know, this is a camera that you can purchase and get delivered pretty much straight away. The C500 Mark III is the latest announcement. That one isn't shipping yet, but will be pretty soon, we're expecting.
Yeah.
So it's certainly not far away. But of course, there's the normal things with all new camera releases, especially very anticipated ones like this, where there's a pre-order list and a waiting list.
That's the thing. So it is shipping. The C300 Mark III starts shipping this month, but there is that list of the pre-order. So depending on each dealer and the pre-orders they have.
Absolutely. Okay, so let's talk.
Okay, so the product concept itself. So we're starting with the full frame 5.9K and the DV7. That's what enables the camera. The processor is the brain and actually the heart of the camera that manages all the operation and enables it to do quite a lot in terms of cinema raw light, oversampling, dual pixel CMOS AF, modular design. So the camera, it's small, compact, lightweight, user interchangeable mounts, as I said, which is now is going to be, I think it's something that the Cinema EOS range will have. Expandability as well. So the camera will be supporting or supports multi-applications when using expansion units. So it can be a single camera operator, it can be multi-cameras, using the camera on a gimbal, drones, or even full-scale cinema operation. So you do have the flexibility to build up the camera depending on your needs.
On that, what do you think the most common sort of setups that you've seen have been?
I think we've had 2. There was the basic setup, run and gun sort of type. But I think the most popular one has been with Extension Unit 2 and the EVF B70.
So people are mainly
That has,
building it
yeah.
up fairly large.
So that's been, as I said, the second kind of popular combination. It doesn't mean that obviously you either go with that or the other. But
Yeah, there's middle
the
grounds.
extension unit with the EVF V70 and the extension unit 2 is proven very popular with the C500, and I think it's probably would be something again with the C300 as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of the appeal is the viewfinder on it. I mean, sure, you lose the touchscreen autofocus and things like that, but for a more narrative environment, which the C500 lends itself to brilliantly, that viewfinder, having that attached is very, very needed, I think. That's a fantastic setup.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay.
Next slide. Okay, so as we said, it's small and lightweight. So the camera is smaller and lighter than the original C500. And just to give you an idea in terms of how light it is, everyone comments about how light and small is the C200. The C500 Mark II, it's only about 300 grams heavier than a 200, which if you think about all the spec and everything you're getting with the camera, it's very light camera. Again, great, the fact that it doesn't have the viewfinder built in, that gives you flexibility, again, using it, as I said, on drones or gimbals. And so it does give you a lot of flexibility. And as I said, it's crazy to think that the cameras are actually getting a lot smaller and lighter and even more powerful. So
absolutely. Yeah, having the cameras with different size sensors and stuff like that, all within the same size of body. And so the red camera behind it is the original C500, which was pretty much the same sort of size and shape as the original C300, wasn't it?
Yeah.
I suppose if anyone's used to those cameras and haven't played much with the more modern Canon cameras, the main difference is how tall the camera gets when it gets built up. So the original C300 and the C500, once you put the top handle on and then you put the monitor thing, it just became quite a tall camera. Whereas these cameras, particularly with the viewfinder, but also with that LCD screen, they just keep everything a lot more compact.
It's keeping it, yeah.
So yes, the actual core body is much smaller than this, but once you rig it all up, you end up with a much more ergonomic camera as a whole. Okay, let's move on to... Oh, lost my mouse. There we go.
Oversampling. So as I said, this is something we'll talk about with most of our Cinema EOS cameras. This camera, so 5.9K, and it uses the full resolution to produce 4K DCI, UHD, 2K and HD as well. So if you think of that added resolution that you're actually getting compared to just the camera just recording 4K directly, so you're looking at improved or increased resolution and even reduced noise and less moire as well. So there are benefits to the oversampling.
Oh, there's a huge benefit of the oversampling. I think if you're going to do any sort of 4K deliverables, this oversampling is going to be a huge selling point for the 500 over, say, the 300 or the 200. Being able to oversample like that means you get a much more accurate color palette to sample from. So the way a Bayer pattern will work for people watching is that you with 4K resolution from an actual 4K sensor, you won't actually get the color information of 4K because you get twice as much green as you do red and blue. So oversampling helps. It's not necessarily a problem. You know, the colors look fantastic without oversampling. But when you do oversampling, you get all of that information and then shrink it down into a smaller resolution. So you get more red and blue pixels to start from, which is why people say it's more color accurate to have oversampled footage. So if you're doing any sort of chroma key, or if you're doing any color intensive grading work like HDR or anything like that, having this oversampling is going to make a big difference to your footage, especially if you are delivering in 4K. That's the important bit. Okay,
so recording format, the camera can record, as we mentioned earlier, cinema raw light. Depending on your sensor choice, so you've got a full frame, the camera can do 5.9K raw. At Super 35, you have 4K DCI. And then at Super 16 is 2K raw. It's 10 or 12-bit depending on the frame rate. So up to 30 is 12-bit, and 50 or 60 you're looking at 10-bit. That gets recorded into CF Express cards. The oversampling obviously with is done to the XFAVC side. So you get 422 10-bit, and said you get 4K UHD, 2K and full HD. So you do have the option. At the moment, it's recorded all eye or intra, depending on what you prefer to call it. But based on the firmware update that was announced same time as the C500 Mark III, you will have the option to record long up as well, same as with the C500 Mark III.
Great.
XFAVC, so you get a 2K proxy. There is oversampling for the 2K proxy as well. That's 4208-bit. That goes into SD cards. I remember before when we did C500 events, we've had people asking about being able to record XFAV, a proxy when recording XFAVC. Again, this is an option that will be added with the same firmware that was announced in April, and you will have the option to record a proxy even when you shoot in XFAVC. So I think two added benefits with the future firmware that I think hopefully will help those actually needing a proxy for XFAVC, or even needing to shoot slightly smaller file with long up rather than an intra or eye. Absolutely.
We've got a question on Mehdia. So Mehdia is still quite expensive, Andreas is saying. Absolutely. CF Express is a very powerful
new one,
new form of media. So yeah, there is a cost that comes along with that. It's incredibly good, incredibly fast media. The fact that there are cameras like the C200, which have got both options, so that if you need to use more affordable media like SD cards, that certainly makes the C200 a much more budget-friendly option as a camera, as a whole package, rather than just the camera body itself being cheaper. But what I would say is that CF Express, because it's such an open platform, there you get a lot more third-party options than you do with some other media types. And so we already see lots of CF Express cards coming out from companies like Wise, for example, companies like that, which will give users an affordable option while still being very good. So I think the price will come down.
It was the same as with the CFast cards when we launched the C200. I mean, CFast cards at the time were probably the most expensive memory card you could think of. And it's the same thing with the CF Express. The thing is with the reason why the XFAVC needs to go into the CF Express is because if you look at the bit rate as well, the size of the file being recorded, it needs to go into CF Express to make sure that you're actually getting your footage and there are no issues. You can't, I mean, SD cards are getting better, but I think there is still a limit to make sure that the performance of the camera is not affected by the type of media you're using. Hence CF Express.
And on that point, Crispy Jacket Studios has just asked, is an external SSD possible? And Barry has answered him. Barry Griffin, by the way, from everyone in the chat, is from Canon and is joining us for the first little bit of this stream to help answer questions for us, which is very useful. Thank you, Barry. But you're asking, is an external SSD possible? Not in the sense which you might be used to from some other manufacturers, where you can actually just plug in an external SSD drive directly into the camera through USB-C or something like that. If you are looking for an external recording onto SSD drives, the option would be to use something like an Atomos recorder, which is what Barry is talking about in his response there. Yes, via HDMI or SDI, and get 4K 60p at 422 10-bit, which is very good. But you can't do the thing which we're starting to see on a lot of smaller cameras, where you can plug in an SSD drive over USB. The reason I assume for that is so that you have more control over the media types that's used, so that there aren't going to be any problems. Is that the case, Mehdia? Do you think?
I mean, I think at the time it was it's something that we've never done. But I mean, I've spoken to, I mean, an example probably not with the C500, but I've spoken to people with the C200 that they found a way around it. Obviously, because it's not something that we've done and tested ourselves, it's not something that I would recommend. But I think there are ways around it to make it, I guess, work, because I understand everyone is concerned about storage. A 512, you're only looking at about half an hour if you're recording a 5.9K. So you either need massive cards, obviously the cost will increase, but hopefully I think it looks, because this seems to be probably the media that we'll be using for a while now. Maybe they will find a way around probably somehow not going through the process of external recording as such by going through HDMI or SDI, but something else. I mean, USB at the moment doesn't do that, but we never know.
While we're sort of on the subject of oversampling, we were just talking about it before going on to Mehdia a little bit. Peter Demetrius is asking, why did Canon start with oversampling on the original C300? So for everyone watching who maybe doesn't know the original C300 very well, that had a 4K sensor, but recorded in 1080p. So you were oversampling from 4K down to 1080p. He says, why did you not then continue that for the 4K C500 Mark II and now the Mark III? It was one of the winning features on that first Cinema EOS camera.
Not sure. I think, again, it's down to the performance of the camera. You want to give the best. Obviously, C300 Mark III does have DGO sensor, which works slightly different to the standard one. We at the moment with DGO, we don't know much about in details in terms of what it needs, in terms of power, etc. And if you don't want it to affect the performance of the camera, you'll have to find the best. It's kind of happy medium. And then the resolution of the sensor as well, because you want to put enough pixels in there to work with, but you don't want to affect the camera's low light performance.
That's
the same. Yeah, the same principle. Yeah, the same principle. Previously with the C300, C100 Mark II as well, because that has a 4K sensor that produces full HD. It was easy just to put an 8 megapixels because 8 megapixels is still, I think, nothing, even if we go back to 2011. But now I think especially with Super 35, once you start increasing the number of pixels, you're going to start affecting the performance of the camera. So you'll have to find the right balance. Absolutely. And I think that's the reason, as I said, we haven't been given a reason why, but I think that's probably one of the reasons why they've done that.
Yeah, of course. And remember as well, Peter, that there was a big jump between the 1080p and then the 4K. And so we've got to wait for some technology to catch up a little bit. But I think the main reason is simply to, like Mehdia says, to get good downsampled for a 4K deliverable, you need to be at really 5.9K is the minimum to get good quality. Like ideally, to get the same amount of downsampling as you were used to in 1080p on the original C300, you would need to have an 8K sensor really to have the same maths going in it. Now, once you start going up to those resolutions, you need to start increasing the sensor size to get the same amount of low light performance and get the same sized pixels in terms of microns. So as Mehdia says, I think that is probably the main reason. Now you've got a slide on high frame rates here, Mehdia. I think this is something that the C300 Mark III has come along and overshadowed the C500 Mark II a little bit because that camera has such good high frame rates. But I think it is important to stress that the C500 is still really quite good. 60 frames a second in 5.9K RAW, for example. That's respectable, very respectable. And then going up to 120.
You can do a lot with that, yeah. Again, I think they said the target market. I mean, the C500 Mark II is a very flexible camera, so you can use it for everything. But I think the high frame rate was more important for a C300 type of kind of customer camera rather than a C500. As you said, 60p, if you really need that, is still great. And then if you really want to push in, get up to 120 frames, then you do have, it's true, is a crop 2K, but it's still good to use. You just probably need to be careful about choices of lenses, and depends on what you're shooting. you can make it work, but I think we can't expect one camera to do everything.
Yeah.
It can go back, to be honest, to the oversampling again, because the C500 Mark III shoots 4K as 4K. You can push it up to 120 frames. With the C500 Mark II, you've got to look at, especially if you record in RAW. Well, actually, if you take RAW out, even if we take RAW out of the equation, with the oversampling, it's still using all that data from a 5.9K sensor to produce that 4K, and you want to push the frame rate to 120. I think that's a lot that you're expecting from the camera.
Sure.
But we never know.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, this was a new addition to the camera, where you have 2 buttons that gives you easy access to actually enabling high frame rate and then selecting the frames without having to go through the menu. Everyone loves that, because you literally select it. Before, with all the other cameras, you would have had to go through the menu 2 or 3 steps to get to that. Whereas on the C500, and the same with the C500 Mark III, you can literally just, as I said, press the first button to enable it, and then the second button to choose what frame rate you want to use.
It makes such a difference. Ceylon, Barry has actually answered him, but let's ask him for the sake of everyone else watching it. Ceylon is asking, do you get autofocus in those modes?
In
these slow motion modes? So
no.
60 frames a second in 4K, or the RAW one you would do, but not in the 2K
up to 60,
crop,
yeah.
right?
Yeah.
That's the case, is it? Fantastic.
Which is, again, is different, because obviously with the C500 you do get the autofocus at 120, but that's a different camera. So
yep.
So modular design. So the C500 Mark II comes as standard with an EF mount. Previously, with other cameras, if you wanted a PL version, either you'll buy the camera as a PL, or you'll need to send the camera for service, which means you losing that camera for a few days or a week, to change into a PL mount or an EF with cinema lock. With this one, it's literally a couple of minutes it takes to change from an EF to a PL or vice versa, which gives people the flexibility of actually, I mean, I know it says in there, freedom in visual expression, so you can use different lenses that give different look to your video by just changing the PL mounts. Before, probably, if you had an EF mount and you have a lens that you love, but it's a PL, you couldn't use it. Whereas now with the 500 Mark II and with the C500, same thing, you could do that. The other options are the extension units. So you still have the option to attach an EVF V50. So that's the standard small viewfinder that you attach to the back of the camera, and then the 2 extension units depending on your needs. So you can build up the camera to see your shooting scenario, whether you're a single camera operator or you're working with a number of people. You can build it up to suit that.
Absolutely. And when we were talking earlier about the viewfinder that goes on the side, just to clarify for people watching, that's not this viewfinder that's in the photo. They make 2 viewfinders. They do this small one, which is a module that clips on the back and takes up that module slot on the back. And then they do an actual viewfinder that is at the side, which is significantly more money because it's a proper viewfinder.
It's a much nicer viewfinder.
It's much nicer. It's one of the best ones on the market in that sort of price range. It's very good. Yeah, I mean, that attaches normally on the side with the monitor mount, and then takes the video cable, which the touchscreen uses to go into the front.
The EVF V70 is the one we introduced with the C700. So you can imagine the quality of that viewfinder, because you're introducing it with the camera that cost 30K plus. So it had to have the right quality, right resolution, and all the options that everyone needs. And as I said, it has proven a popular combination with the C500, and I think it will be the same thing with the 300. The benefit, obviously, of having the EVF V70, because it's on the side and it will attach where you would usually have the LCD, you can still use the extension unit at the back. Whereas if you use the smaller extension, the smaller viewfinder, that's basically it, because it's taking the contact, it's using the contacts. You can't attach extension unit 1 or 2.
Sure. Yep.
So that's the other thing to keep in mind.
Andreas is asking, it would be nice to order the camera with the mount of your choice, for example, locking EF. So I believe the way it works at the moment, I'm not in the sales department, so I don't normally deal with this on a day-to-day basis, but I believe the way you buy the camera, it has the normal EF mount on it. Is that right, Mehdia? And then you can choose the locking EF mount or the PL mount as an optional extra to add to that. Yes,
so it comes as standard with an EF mount.
It makes an interesting point though, because I suppose what that does mean is that if you know that you want the EF cinema lock, you've already paid for one EF mount, which you're then not going to use. You just want the new one. Do you know if there are any plans to do it that way, or do you think that's something that we won't see?
It could be something that, I mean, it's something that will feed back. And then obviously if it's practical in a way, because if all the cameras are manufactured at the moment with an EF mount, it's not going to be an easy thing to do.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, all we could do is we can feed it back and see what they're going to say.
Yep. And I will do the same and see if any of our sales team get that request very often. Because it is an interesting point. It's definitely an interesting point. What I would say though, Andreas, is that I imagine that Canon are absorbing a lot of the cost of that initial EF mount. I certainly wouldn't think about it as you're paying for a mount that you don't need. Think about it as that's the body price, and then to get a different mount is X amount of money on top of that. I imagine if Canon decided to go the different route and sold the camera effectively without a mount, which is how they would have to do it, and then we as a dealer would combine the mounts, you wouldn't see that much of a cost difference. Would be
it
my
won't
gut
be
feeling.
Yeah, if you were to remove the EF mount or sell it with the EF mount, I don't think there would be much of a difference.
It might even potentially make it more expensive for people who only want the normal EF mount. So there are drawbacks of doing it that way as well from a behind the scenes point of view. So that might be some of the thinking.
The EF mount is pretty much standard, and I think the expectation is out of the box you can just use the camera straight away. Everyone would have, at least, no matter how basic it is, an EF lens of some sort. Whereas, for example, if you were to get a PL mount on the camera, if you were to put a PL mount on all the cameras, that's not going to be practical. Maybe in the future there might be an option to do that, but obviously that will affect the price. Whereas with the standard EF mount, there wouldn't be any difference in the price.
So while we're on this slide, have we discussed the difference between those two extension backs, the V1 and the V2? Did we go into that?
No, we didn't. We can go into that. So
do you want to briefly go through what the differences are?
The main difference, as you can see, with extension unit 2, it gives you the option to use V-Lock batteries. We've got DTAP connections as well. It still gives you the Ethernet connection, lens port. So you do get some of the ports that you already have on extension unit 1. But I think the biggest added benefit is the fact that you can use V-Lock. There is DC out as well, and then lens control. So if you're using broadcast lenses, there is the connection there for lens communication. So there is a lot that unit actually could do.
I tend to think about it as the unit 2 is the normal one, and then the unit 1 is almost a very niche specialized one for multi-camera work, particularly on things like crane arms and stuff like that, where having a really low profile extension back on the back just to give you things like gen lock and the LAN control and stuff like that, I think is really useful for environments like that.
I think most people they went for the extension unit 2.
Absolutely.
Because yes, I mean it might look big in the picture, but it's fairly light.
Oh, it's very light.
It doesn't add much weight to the camera. So if anyone is concerned about the weight, then as I said, it hardly weighs anything. So
it does make it quite substantially bigger. It sort of pushes it back quite a bit. It doesn't quite double the length of the camera, but it does. It's just sort of near there.
I guess once you add the V-Lock battery and everything, so it kind of you are building it up. But that depends on what you need it for. So if you're out shooting for hours, that can be useful.
We just had a question from Mark Job, who I believe in an earlier one said that he was in Canada. The earlier post, by the way, Mark, were you saying that the one camera to rule them all was the C500? Or did you say that you wanted the one camera to rule them all? Let us know if you think there is one camera to rule them all, because I'm very much of the opinion there will never be a perfect camera. There will never be one camera to rule them all.
I think that's impossible, because I think even when Canon makes a camera that they think it's 100% perfect, you will always find at least one person that won't be happy with something. So it's impossible. And I think these cameras are out there to satisfy certain needs and shooting scenarios. And as I said, you've got cameras for cinema, you've got broadcast. So I think if you put everything in one camera and you basically push it to the market, there will be those that will be paying for added features that they might not need, and they might not be happy about paying the extra for it. So there is always that issue. I mean, we've had that issue, I know, on the photo side quite a lot, adding more video features on a stills camera. So I guess the same applies.
You get a load of grumpy photographers who don't want to pay for that video side of it. Makes a lot of sense.
So I guess
as far as we're concerned, more video features, please.
I mean, the 500, as I mentioned earlier, I still think is probably the most flexible camera we have in the cinema EOS range. So it does cover quite a lot.
But Mark's current question was, apart from the 30k price, what is the main differences between the C500 Mark II and the C700, presumably the 700 FF? Aren't they both 6k based sensor cameras?
They're both 5.9k. I mean, the C500 Mark II uses the sensor from the C700.
So it's the same sensor.
I think probably the one that stands out, I mean, the C500, because it's using the same sensor, it has taken quite a lot from the C700, but it comes down to the recording capabilities, because you have your, as Barry calls it, full fat RAW that the C500 can do by just getting the codecs. You could record ProRes as well on the C700, and then the frame rates. So those are the added benefits going up to the C700 full frame, because obviously with the C500 you have Cinema Raw Lite internally, but you don't have the option to record RAW externally, for example. But I think with all the processor in the camera, I think in terms of probably if we're just looking at resolution, I would say probably the 500 is up there with the C700.
Yeah, it just comes down, as I said, this same image quality from both, really, can't you? It's more about the ergonomics and, like you said, the full frame. The full format. Really.
Oh yeah, the size of the camera as well, but
the size of the camera and the ergonomics are just entirely different. The C700 is very much designed around a crew around a camera. You know, that operator panel on the side, which you can then take off and run along a cable, all of that sort of stuff, which is fantastic for crews that need to work together. Whereas the C500,
I mean, you can build up. You can start with the basic C500 and then build it up. To almost the size of the C700, whereas the C700 you do have that size to start with, and as I said, you do have all those added options in terms of recording if you need them, hence the price.
Absolutely. Jason Van Patten is just going back to an earlier point that we were making, that he says he's a C500 Mark II owner. Can he make a product suggestion? He'd like an expansion module with a Thunderbolt 3 port on it so that we can use denser and less expensive external storage. He assumes that the expansion module slot has access to that image processor. So he says, let's get some better storage options. CF Express are just too silly expensive.
We can feed it back.
We can feed it back. Yeah, absolutely. What I would, in my opinion, as somebody outside Canon, it would seem a very un-Canon thing to do, to allow people to, because the trouble is you allow a data port out like that, and you open it up to normal everyday recording happening to pretty much any device. And so yes, you could use proper cages and locks to make sure everything's very secure, and then you only use the highest quality enterprise SSDs, all the rest of it. But you could use a really cheap little hard drive, and
that's
just
a risk,
balance it on top of the camera, and I think Canon normally tend to take the approach of making very reliable pieces of kit, which they've never been one to open it up and mean that you only have to use the one particular thing. You know, if it records on SD cards, normally it will record on SD cards that are fairly wide. It won't have to be very specific types of ones. And so I think opening it up to external hard drives like that would open up a big old can of worms. What do you think on that, Mehdia?
Yeah, I think future cameras maybe, but doing anything or any updates to existing cameras, I can't see that happening. Because as you said, there are sometimes we don't add certain features to the camera because we know if we were to put that feature in the camera is not going to be performing to 100%. And that's obviously, that's a no-no for Canon. So you'll have to work to achieve that 100% or not use it. The same thing will be for this. And I think if there was an option with the existing range, they would have done it. And since they haven't, it means it probably not going to work, or it's not going to work as well as they want it to.
He's just made a good counter argument point. He says, I don't follow that argument. Actually, there are really bad CF Express cards out there too, really bad ones, so bad that the C500 Mark II can't use them. Be interesting to know, Jason, which ones you're talking about there. Is there any brands that you've had particularly bad experience with on that part? For the most part, I've been tending to stick to the SanDisk ones and the Wise ones, which have been fairly good as a cheaper option. I think there might be a couple more on the market now. Do Angelbird have one?
There are more, but I think for us as Canon, we've tested them with SanDisk. Yeah. But there are loads of other cameras.
I can't remember if Angelbird have released one.
I think there is.
I think if Angelbird have, that would be one that I would go for as well. They tend to be pretty good cards.
There is another one, but I can't just now think of it. But there are a number of reliable, I think, cards out there. But the one that we've tested and we can recommend are the SanDisk ones. But then again, I think loads of people have probably been using SanDisk cards.
Yep. And of course, the speed of the card and the performance of the drive is only one
that's key,
picture of it. You've then got the cable, you've then got the actual port to go into it, and will it just get pulled out, and all the other arguments against using SSDs. But what it would definitely do is if it was enabled, would mean that the storage cost per gigabyte would come down massively. And so it would be very welcome if we can find a way that
it will have an effect on external recording as well. So because you kind of bypassing the usual kind of routes.
Yeah, absolutely. You would still use the codecs from the camera though, which would be the main difference. So if you chuck something out over the HDMI or the SDR, you're just sending out a video feed, which then an external recorder can reinterpret into a codec and compress down in whatever way it sees fit. So DNX HD, ProRes, different flavors, etc. Whereas plugging in an external SSD, you would get the camera to then see it effectively as a internal card.
Which means you can do raw recording into that.
Raw recording, but in Cinema Raw Lite, which is important.
Oh yeah, Cinema Raw Lite,
or XFAVC, depending on whichever you want.
I guess in the future I can see that, but probably not at the moment. So
he says he thinks the main downside of external storage units is that you're also adding to the signal chain, which increases the chance of something going wrong. Absolutely, that's the sort of thing we're talking about. Oh, sorry, that was somebody else. That was James Jackson Films said that. I think that's exactly what I'm trying to say there, James. Right, okay, let's head on to the next slide.
Okay, this is purely just because I added the bit where you could use the 2/3 of an inch broadcast lenses with the B4 mount, and this is where you need again the extension unit too, because you have the port for lens communication.
Right. Yes.
Be able to control the lens.
Do you think there's much of an image quality?
It is 2K, so you are going down to 2K. So so Super 16.
And presumably it is an image expander. Is it that that adapter? So there'd be a light loss, would there?
Excuse me. I don't think there will be.
Okay.
It's just a way of mounting that lens into the larger excuse me.
Okay, cool. Right, now electronic IS.
Yeah, so as I mentioned earlier, C500 Mark II is the first camera to... My voice, I think it's
Oh
going.
dear, are you okay?
Yeah, I'm fine. First cinema EOS camera to incorporate this electronic IS. So it's not the IBIS that everyone talks about in other cameras, but it does actually make a huge difference. Every time, I think, when we used to do events where people were able to hold the camera, you would see a difference between
Different
shooting.
time, hey.
Yeah, I mean, just even looking back, probably going back to January, February, it just feels like a very long time. It's basically the camera analyzes the vibrations which is caused by the handheld operation, and then counteracts those movements digitally. And then the system itself, it basically uses this active frame. The frame gets moved around based on as I said, the vibration, the external vibrations, to correct that movement. Only in XFAVC, because there is a slight crop. So you're looking at roughly about 10%. It doesn't affect 4K resolution. So if anyone is concerned about when they have it on, it will affect the resolution. It doesn't. So when you shoot in XFAVC, even in kind of full frame, you still get in the 4K. There will be no impact on that. Just for it to work, it needs to crop in slightly. I mean, it's a very small crop, but it does make a massive difference whether you're shooting, as I said, using wide-angle lenses, but you'll see it with zoom lenses as well. With EF lenses, because the lens is talking to the camera, so the camera will be able to register that focal length and correct based on that. If you're using PL lenses, including anamorphic lenses, you can actually key in the focal length, and then the camera will correct it based on the focal length you just inputted in there.
Yeah.
So it is, I think, it's very helpful.
It's super helpful. Well, in my quick test of this, which I did on the C500 Mark II, for the most part, I found it was very good for stationary shots. So if you're doing the sort of, it really helps to have this attached to one of the assignable buttons. I think you can assign it to an assignable button. If you can't,
you can. There is a way around it. It's not in the options. When you go into the all the options, you get to customize buttons. I mentioned this to Barry. I think that this is one, and then we had a number of people that asked if you can customize the sensor mode to buttons. If you look at all the options, it's not actually on there, but there is one thing that I think everyone misses, which is right at the bottom of those options, called menu user settings. What does allow you to do is actually go into that, and then you go into the menu and pick any option on that menu, including IS, including sensor mode, even including recording, whether XFAVC or RAW, and then apply it to that button. So when you press the button, it will take you to that. So with the IS, it won't basically enable it straight away, but it reduces the steps that you need to go through to enable it.
Absolutely.
The same
that's
goes
a brilliant
for
tip. So you can assign any single item,
any option, yeah,
as to an assignable button with that. I didn't know that. That's a very, very good tip.
So that's on a C200, C300 Mark III, and C500 Mark II.
So with that, then having it quickly on a button so you can toggle it on and off, I think is going to be a fantastic way of working. Because in my test, I tend to find that the stabilization was very, very good when you were doing still shots. So say I've got a long lens on and I'm just doing still, like B-roll handheld, just going, okay, let's get that shot there, and now let's get that shot there. That sort of shooting, it was very, very good at. For walking things and stuff like that, where really you should be using a gimbal for this sort of level of work. But whereas some actual IBIS and image stabilization can sort of get away with some of that, and some of the sways and the walking and stuff like that, I tend to find that the electronic IS here wasn't quite as good, because with anything like that, because you really should be using a gimbal, you do. Yeah,
that's the thing. It's not doing the gimbal's job.
No, absolutely not.
It's helping you to a certain extent. But there will be movement that the camera won't be able to actually counteract. So
yeah, definitely. And then when in electronic IS, when it can't counteract it, it does tend to jump a little bit and look more electronic. So mostly I tend to have it on a toggle button so that I can toggle it on and off for the situations which I know it's going to handle very well. And that's really those, even at quite long lenses, those sort of stationary, almost sort of sniped B-roll shots. It's very good at that. James Jackson Films is asking, will the 5-axis work with third-party lenses that have IS like Tamron? I've had prior experience where the lenses wouldn't talk to the camera. Wasn't with all Canon cameras, just the cinema cameras.
I would probably think that the way it works, if the lens doesn't have IS, it will be 5-axis IS. If the Canon lenses in particular has IS, then the body will use 3, and then it uses 2-axis from the lens. With third-party ones, I'm guessing if it's not getting any information regarding the IS, it probably will just take it as a non-IS lens, and then use. I think I probably would recommend switching the IS on the lens, because it might cause a problem. It is worth testing it.
Conflicting with each other.
You can test it, but I would say switch it off and let the camera kind of presume that it is a manual, no IS on that lens, and it uses the 5-axis.
Yep. So I think that's, James, that's part of your problem with it working on, not on some of the stills cameras from Canon, whereas not on the cinema ones. It's because that swap of 5-axis normally, or 2 and 3 with the right lens, that's a very cinema camera thing rather than a stills camera thing. So it might just simply be that is that what you're seeing there. Okay.
So ND filters, I think everyone loves this option on the camera that you get up to 10 stops ND. It does give you flexibility. So if you want to, again, shoot in bright sunlight, I mean, video or stills, that's always it's everyone's kind of nightmare. You want to open up your aperture, but it's too bright out there to do anything. And that's where the ND filters actually come in. So you have 2, 4, and 6, which are the standard, and then you can expand it through the menu to get the 8 and 10, giving you huge flexibility to still have that control over your depth of field without compromising on anything else.
And now the C500 particularly sits in, I tend to really put the C500 in with the cinema cameras, the Reds and the Aries of the world, rather than like the C300s or the FS7s, that sort of more operator camera. So in that cinema world, having internal NDs is actually quite rare. This is a real benefit. And it is a big benefit, in my opinion, because the ND filters can be so closely paired to the sensor. You can, the manufacturer, so Canon, can take real steps to make sure that the color, the IR performance, everything like that is very finely tuned with each of those cameras, rather than just putting your own NDs on the front, which of course is down to 2 brands, and they need to work on a variety of different cameras. These ND filters only have to work on the C500 Mark II specifically, and so can be made very specifically for what produces the best results with that sensor. And so having internal NDs on a cinema camera is brilliant. And Dolly is saying Ari's been doing it for ages. Yeah, absolutely. And there's a reason for that. It's because it is the best way to do it. But historically with cinema cameras, really they were the first people to do it. And I just think it's something that is very, very common in that middle ground of the market. The C300s, the FS7s, that sort of camera. Yeah. If a Pro Video one in that market comes out without built-in ND filters, it is a major, major drawback.
It is the expectation now.
What's that about? Whereas a cinema camera, yeah, absolutely. You can get cinema cameras released all the time without internal NDs. And I'm a really strong believer in internal NDs. They make a big, big difference. Okay. Now, this is something interesting. I hadn't actually seen this before you sent over this PowerPoint presentation.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, the C500 Mark II was the first one. to have the diffraction correction. This is usually when you use in very small aperture. So if you close down your aperture, resolution usually gets a hit, hence the diffraction. So with this enabled, again, only in XFAVC, what it does, it just basically corrects that loss of resolution, because the image may look slightly blurred around the edges. So it does correct it. And
do you know what what it's actually doing to achieve this? Is it just dialing up sharpness when it knows the aperture's that low, or is it more complicated than that?
I'm pretty sure there is a lot more to it than just that. I don't have the exact details in terms of how it's applying it, but that's something I can actually check.
Okay. Yeah, that would be interesting to know, as to how it's retrieving that sharpness back and correcting the loss. Because diffraction is a very physics-based thing. You know, it's just the light rays have been split because they're going through too small a space. And so how to counteract that in a camera is a fascinating concept. And if it is just as simple, as long as there's an option to turn it off, if it is just as simple as it's dialing up the sharpness, that's okay.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's off by default, and then you enable it if you want to.
Turn it on. Yeah, no, it's a very interesting idea. Now, this is a slide that surprises people a lot, because Canon are very much known for their color accuracy and color performance.
But this is something, it doesn't mean it's for everything. I think with this particular one, it just the new this gamma mapping technology that Canon is using in the C500 Mark II and the C300 Mark III as well. It basically improves. It doesn't mean it was really bad. It just improving it, especially when dealing with LED lights. I mean, I guess the images there probably exaggerated.
This and the next couple of slides, I do have a little bit of a problem with some of the marketing and the images that it shows in the news, because I think it gives a bit of a false impression there.
Because I've seen the red tones from the previous cameras, and they are pretty much red.
Look like that.
Yeah, they don't look like almost that magenta sort of thing. So they're not that bad. But as I said, for those that actually where color is extremely important, and they will be able to spot the slight difference in the color to different tones, this is an improvement for them. I guess for probably the majority, if you've never had this issue, then it's fine. But for those that actually had issues with previous models, then this is an improvement.
Well, there's a thing, and I think the revealing bit of text there is that the color suppression algorithm has been improved for the high luminance and high saturation. So once you get up to very, very saturated images like neon lights and stage lights and stuff like that, is very common, and they hit the brightest parts, they tend to clip weirdly. And so what I imagine they're doing is they've paid more attention to that, for each camera specifically, to basically throttle how saturated that color is allowed to get, to make it feel more natural. It
does give you, when it comes to the saturation, it does give you more of a natural looking change. So it doesn't look like, well, it's almost kind of trying to find the best way. It's much smoother and nicer and more natural transition in that saturation.
James Jackson Films has just asked again, thanks for all the great questions, by the way, James. Any chance of a firmware where chromatic aberration correction and video diffraction can be added in Cinema Raw Light as metadata? Do you know if you can add those things, Mehdia, with the Canon Raw development software?
You should be. I think you could probably do it on a software, because I'm thinking about it from the still side of it, because there are certain things you can actually apply afterwards. So it is probably something I haven't. I mean, that's again probably another thing that I'll check with CRD or the Cinema Raw development.
It might be able to do it already. Could be.
But the way the RAW is recorded, I can't see that. I mean, in the metadata, I'm not sure if that's because it will be graded out when you're in RAW. So I don't know how you would be able to enable it and expect the camera to add it into the metadata. So probably something that maybe with the software is doable, but that's something that I'll have to check.
Okay. Right, this was the slide I was talking about where I wasn't very keen on the images that we used.
Was it? This is probably the one you've seen from, I don't know how many cameras. I mean, we've seen
it's not your fault, Mehdia. It's every manufacturer does it.
I'm glad I removed other slides as well. Yeah, with this, is basically the camera allows you to record two HDR methods. So you do have the option to use HLG or hybrid log gamma, or PQ or perceptual quantization. Very easy to actually apply by going into the custom picture menu, gamma settings, and then you have that. It's probably too small to see on that little picture on there. And then you do have the two options there to choose from, depending on what you need to do. And while recording HDR on board, you do have the option to record either SDR or HDR externally as well. So you do have that option. And the next slide basically goes about the SDR gain settings. Are the examples OTT as well? So with that, it basically
the steps between them are fine. It's just that everyone tends to, for the HDR proper exposure one, go for a photo fake HDR multiple image thing, whereas, and that's for a very valid reason. It's because you can't show a proper HDR image in this sort of environment.
You're not going to be able to see it.
And they don't want to put up an image that looks basically the same as a normal image, so they do this. But I just worry that means that everyone thinks that HDR is going to give them pictures that look like that, and it doesn't.
No.
I don't think people would want that either.
So basically with this is important if you, as I said, you record in HDR on board and you send in the SDR via the SDR interface. There is this setting on there, option on there called the SDR gain settings. That actually gives you the option to adjust the SDR gain difference versus the HDR option. As you can see in the top example, just let's imagine that's the correct one. So the HDR image is perfect. If we look at the SDR on the outside, it's overexposed. So that's where you need gain decrease to correct that exposure. The second example is the opposite. So perfectly exposed HDR. SDR, it looks underexposed. And then you need a gain increase or a positive gain to correct or to restore the correct exposure, basically.
This is very useful for quick turnaround, particularly documentary stuff where you want to have both formats ready to go, something for post-production for HDR, and then something just to quickly hand off as a deliverable. Playing with this and finding settings here that work well for you, it's going to make your life much easier. Right.
Next one. I mean, I don't know how much we can go into autofocus, but again,
I think I'm assuming most people watching this are pretty familiar now with Canon's autofocus.
So we can skip the AF ones then.
Let's just very briefly say it's very good.
It's great. Indeed. It's very fast, very accurate.
Yep.
I think the one thing which is, I think, is in one of the slides that I'll mention. So probably everyone who's used a Canon cinema camera knows that you can fine tune the AF in terms of adjusting the speed, and then the tracking sensitivity as well. So if you're tracking one subject and you get something in between the camera and your subject, then the camera won't pick up on that. Or if you want the tracking to be more responsive, so it keeps going from one to another. You also have face priority and face only. Again, that can be useful depending on what you're filming. But the other thing as well is previously on other focus guide in manual focus. Again, this is another way to make sure that your focus is spot on. I mean, you have manual focus speaking, but this is one to use on top of that to make sure that your subject is definitely as crisp as anything, because sometimes obviously when shooting 4K or higher resolutions, it's quite hard to see on the screen if it's correct or not. the screen, what you see on the screen sometimes can be misleading because it's too small. This actually give you a helping hand in terms of making sure that your focus is correct.
Was there something you wanted to say on this other slide? Did I cut you off?
No, I think the next one. No, I think this is the next.
Okay.
Maybe, I think it's this one. This is purely because in previous models, once you go over f11, the autofocus switches to contrast. With C500 Mark II, C300 Mark III as well. Now, actually, you have up to f13. So even if you're using f13 for one reason or another, you still get the benefit of dual pixel CMOS AF, of the focus guide as well. The other improvement with the C500 is actually even in terms of if you go over f13, the contrast has been improved, so it's actually smoother and more accurate. So kind of, I guess, two benefits. You do have dual pixel CMOS AF up to f13, plus there is a noticeable improvement in contrast AF if you need to go above f13.
Absolutely. We've got a couple of good questions come in. MB is saying, is there a reason the manual focus guide is only available on EF glass? I only run PL lenses, and this would be a great option to have.
Yeah, there is a reason, because the focus guide uses the information from the dual pixel CMOS AF to work, so it needs that communication between the lens and the body.
Otherwise, it would be purely focus.
Yeah, distance. Distance and everything.
Not accurate.
Sorry. Otherwise, if it doesn't have that information, it won't be able to give you all the details in terms of whether you're back or front focusing and how much adjustment you need to do.
Yep.
Even if it's a Canon PL lens, like with our Sumire lenses, it still won't work. So
yeah, which you're right, MB, is a massive shame, because with PL lenses it would be incredibly useful if it can ever find a way to work in the future. But for the moment, it's a very hard technology.
It's the lens that we'll have to change, I think, rather than the camera, because that's
You'd have
the minute the lens
including autofocus technology in a cinema lens which can't actually use that autofocus technology. It would be a rather manufacturing feat, I think. Andreas is saying, will there be a firmware update for the autofocus if the AI becomes more advanced, like recognizing animals, for example? Or IAF, James is just saying there.
That could, we've done it in stills cameras where the dual pixel CMOS AF was improved, but even speed. I'm guessing the animal one that's coming from the R5.
And you have done it with cinema cameras before, I think. You in the earlier days of not animal. Sorry, introducing firmware update that adds more autofocus functionality. I believe you did that with some of the earlier cinema EOS ones.
300 and the 100. There was a feature update to actually add dual pixel CMOS AF altogether. That was a slightly different kind of firmware, but I think in terms of improving the performance of dual pixel CMOS AF, it is doable via firmware update. Whether it all depends on the feedback. So whether they think it's something relevant that can be added into firmware, Canon will definitely add that. So all depends on the feedback.
Right, let's go through some. This is a rather numbers-heavy slide.
No, the only reason I put this slide on there is just to see that you can still get up to 4K with 12G SDI and HDMI. Well, as if you're using the monitor out, you're limited to a maximum of 2K. But we can skip through that.
This one's quite an interesting one though, because of that new LUT button that's on the side.
Yeah, so easy access to the LUT option, but you can also basically add up to 4 user LUTs on the camera using the memory card, 4 at any time, and then you can replace them. And then you can apply the LUT to different outputs. So you can have one LUT going into your screen, LCD screen, or the EVA V70 if you're using that, one to the viewfinder, and then one through the SDI, one through the HDMI. So you do have that flexibility to apply various slots to different output terminals.
Which is a very important point, because not every camera can do that, and it is very useful indeed. Okay,
Audio is purely just to say that you've got 4-channel audio, 24-bit. You do get 2 XLRs on the body. I think I know the feedback that we have at the moment is that the controls are on the wrong side. I'm not sure if there is anything that can be done at the moment. You do get 2 additional XLRs if you're using the extension unit 2. So you can basically use the 4 input 1, 2, 3, and 4 with the 2 combinations, the 2 XLRs on the body and 2 on the extension unit.
What I would say is that, yes, you say that they're on the wrong side, which they are, but it is really only a problem when you are up on the shoulder. When it's on a tripod in front of you, I actually prefer this way of place for them being. It's just that when you get it up on your shoulder, they're not accessible at all, really. So you've got to get the camera off to adjust them.
Well, I think it's if you were to prioritize and look at the options that we have on the left-hand side with all those buttons and the audio, I think if anyone prioritizing, they will definitely design it the way it is at the moment. You can't have the audio on that side where I think the majority of people might not need them, and then the buttons on the other side, and then there will be obviously more complaints about everything else being on the wrong side. So I think just sometimes, because of the size of the body as well, you just have to find a way around it. And at the moment, that is where it is.
It certainly makes it difficult. It certainly does. Okay, false color, not most exciting topic in the world, but something that I am so happy to see inside the camera.
It does. Again, this is another way just to check that your exposure is correct, and then you do get that guide, so you know, depending on the colors that you have. I mean, based on that, you definitely don't want to see too much red or too much blue or whatever you want to call that color. But it does actually help you. That you can basically see through EVF, for example, V70. I think loads of people use that on the EVF V70, or you can apply it on our reference displays as well. So again, this is one of the options, the same as with the light, that you can apply it to different output terminals. You can do the same thing with the false color.
My recommendation would definitely be that people use this, put it on an assignable button, toggle it on and off throughout the shoot day. It will mean that you get exposure so much better. It is a really
again, you can customize the button to do it. So
absolutely. I normally just replace the one that's set to zebras because I just find it better to use than zebras.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Right, anamorphic lenses.
So anamorphic support for 1.3 and 2 times. And then you can see that obviously it de-squeezes them via the EVF if you're using the EVF, or if you send in anything through the monitor or the HDMI as well. But this is on the C500 Mark II, but as well as on the C300 Mark III. Obviously with the PN mount on the camera. But this is again a great option that a camera usually previously you would have had to go high-end cameras to be able to have this feature. But as I said, we've added now this to the C500 Mark II and the 300 Mark III as well.
And it's very welcome. The C300 Mark III paired with lenses like the Orions, for example, would be beautiful. And there's not as many full frame anamorphic options out there for the C500 Mark II. You can use it in Super 35 mode, obviously with those lenses, which is fine. Or rent some sort of Big Cook anamorphics, which are gorgeous lenses. And
they are really nice.
Rather nice combination. This camera with one of those would be lovely.
Browser reboot, I think we mentioned it last week with the C200. With this, because the camera doesn't have built-in Wi-Fi, you can either get the wireless file transmitter, the WFTE9, to make the camera wireless. It sits, it gets attached to the camera on one of the ports on the right-hand side. I think it's one port that everyone was asking a question about what it's supposed to be doing, because when we launched the camera, we didn't say much about it. Or if you get extension unit 1 or 2, you have the Ethernet connection on it, so you can connect via the router. Browser remote gives you flexibility to control the camera where the camera is not actually near you. So if the camera is hanging from a ceiling or something, or if it's somewhere where you can't access it, this is another way where you have access to all the camera settings and you will be able to change them.
Yep.
On a tablet, on a phone, or on a computer.
It is brilliant. Can you do much metadata stuff with this as well? I just noticed a little tag
It does
there.
show you, so it shows you the metadata. So the phone one, it just purely records start and stop, and then you have the video, little video symbol is that main screen, and then the middle one is the metadata, so it just shows you everything that you've got set up. But I don't think you can go into it and change anything, but it's just a preview of your metadata. So
gotcha. Yeah, I think this will be something that it will be used much more as we start to transition from in social distancing, going back to work, and being able to take a good few meters away from your camera and still be able to use all of the functions on the camera will be very useful.
Yeah, I mean, this is something we've had on a number of our cameras for a few years, but not many people are actually aware of it.
Yep. I think people will be a lot more aware of it over the next couple of months.
Yeah, I think the lockdown has its ways as well. So, but definitely recommend if anyone hasn't tried it to try it. IP streaming option. So again, this is on a C500, and then you have the same option on a 300 Mark III as well. For this to work, obviously with Ethernet, so you're going to need extension unit 1 or 2. It won't work if you're on if you're recording RAW. So XFAVC internally, that will give you the option to IP stream. You will need a decoder and then software to be able to use it. There are recommendations on Canon website in terms of the decoders. They're recommending Fujitsu one, and then VLC software as well to make the whole thing work.
Gotcha. Okay.
We should be, that's the last one, I think.
GPS.
So via attaching it to the camera using, this is the last one pretty much. Via USB, you can use a GPE2 GPS unit that actually tags the location and time information to your clips. Yeah,
very useful indeed. Okay, let's just have a little quick look through to see if there's any other questions. Brian Benoit is saying plans for firmware updates are there any plans for firmware updates so that we don't lose autofocus when you use the slow and fast button? I believe that is just down to the processing power, is it? Mehdia?
Yeah, I don't think that's a firmware update thing.
Yeah.
But as I said, it is something we can feed it back, but as you said, it's more processing than anything. So I don't think it can be fixed with a firmware update, because I think if it was doable, then it would have been, especially keeping in mind that the C500 came out before the 300. But we never know. I mean, the camera is still, even though it's not that new anymore because of the 300, it's still very new. So we never know.
So another question that I was saving to the end was about weatherproofing. I can't find it just yet, but they were saying, what is the weatherproofing and weather sealing like? Because he wants to use them for documentary filmmaking. There we go. Organism X. I'm looking to buy my first Canon cinema camera, and my interest is into documentary filmmaking. I read that the cameras are not weather sealed. Should I be concerned about that? Now, Barry did reply to him and saying no cinema camera is totally weather sealed, as they all have vents. The body buttons and dials are weather sealed. And he came back and clarified that he was debating it versus the FX9, and he doesn't understand why the FX9 is advertised as being weather sealed. So yeah, this is really a whole thing with. I mean, no camera is weather sealed because it's got a hole in the front for a lens.
Yeah, that's the one thing I was going to say. It's on the top of actually the body being weather sealed, you need to look at the lenses you're using. And like with most of our L series lenses, for example, that get used a lot on the SLRs, they have this rubber bit at the back, and if you're using it with weather sealed body, then you know it's fine. But if you're using different lenses without that, so that's already kind of affecting the weather sealing of a camera if it is. I'm pretty sure it does have some sort of weather, so you can go out in crazy kind of temperatures below, I don't know, 20, 30 degrees and shoot with it. I think it's just a matter of knowing the effect that it's going to have. So when it's extreme cold, you'll know that it's going to hit the battery quite hard. So making sure that you're going to have enough batteries, and probably using the right batteries, and then even making sure that the camera is covered. I wouldn't recommend basically going out when it's heavy rain and shoot with it out in the rain, because even if the camera can survive it, the lens won't survive it.
But to be honest, I wouldn't recommend that for any camera that isn't like maybe a 5D with the lens on and everything like that, or the 1DX Mark III, that sort of camera would be really the only cameras. And I'm talking all the way up and down the spectrum, right up to the highest end of video camera, down to the cheapest consumer camera. I think they would be the only cameras that I'd feel even remotely comfortable doing that with. So that's not really a thing with debating like FX9 versus this and all that sort of stuff. I wouldn't have whether I would treat them the same for weather sealing. Would be my recommendation.
Most of the cinema cameras, even going back to the original C500, that they have been used in extreme conditions, and obviously the system now has been improved, so the body themselves that actually they're better built. There will be, I mean, I think it's because obviously, as with what Barry mentioned there, because of the way the cinema cameras work, or video cameras in general, I don't think you can label a camera weather sealed because of everything else that might affect the camera. But you can, I guess you can push it. You just have to be careful about the lenses you're using with the camera. So I think the lens will be affected more than the actual body. So
absolutely. And I, as somebody who recommends cameras independently, whenever I get a customer that needs to take a camera somewhere extreme like a desert or something like that, Canons have been on the list for consideration for a long time. They do stand up very well in that sort of environment. So for documentary filmmaking particularly, the cameras like this and the C500 Mark II, III would be very, very high on the list of ones I'd be considering. Very, very high. Okay, the last question that we'll get to, because we're running a bit over time. Sorry, Mehdia.
That's fine.
The last one I wanted to get to was Jason, who just said, which has the cleaner image when shooting in 4K 422 10-bit, the DGO of the Canon C500 Mark III or the full frame of the Canon C500 Mark II? Now, I don't have an answer for that because I haven't done any tests. Do you at all, Mehdia?
I haven't done any tests myself. We haven't been given any tests that have been done by Canon Inc.
What I would say,
my personal opinion, I was going to say, if I were to think of it from a personal opinion, is I would probably still say maybe the 500 will have the edge. I know obviously the C300 with the DGO, there is a significant improvement and you get less noise. But again, you still have to think that it is a super 35mm sensor and you're comparing it to full frame. So there's always going to be that difference. So I think if we say...
The way I tend to think about it is that DGO has helped the Super 35 of the C500 Mark III get to the standard of the full frame of the C500. So I would say that it is either very close or the C500 has a slight edge, or if one of them has an edge, it is a slight edge. I would, to be honest, for all intents and purposes, put them in the same camp for things like dynamic range and noise floor.
But as I said, I haven't personally done any tests, so I can't really confirm 100% that one is better than the other. But...
Absolutely. Okay, so I think that let's wrap this up for now then, Mehdia. So thank you so much for your time today. It's been very useful.
No problem at
all.
Very
useful indeed. And thank you to everyone who's watching. Thank you for your comment. There's a really good bunch of questions there, actually, this one. I thought, Mehdia, do you agree?
Yeah, I to be honest, I think the more questions we get, it means there is more interest. So that's a good thing. So.
Absolutely. I think that was a really, really healthy discussion going on there about the cameras. Thank you all so much for chiming in and for your questions. It really makes these live streams something a bit different from what we normally do and makes them better, I think, when we can actually actively involve people who are out there watching. I don't know, I really enjoy that. So, yeah, thank you all so much for watching. Thank you very much, Mehdia, for giving up your time to come and join us.
You're welcome. And thanks, everyone.
I hope everyone is staying safe out there. See you all very soon. Bye.
Bye.
MKE600 is a shotgun microphone ideal for professional video camera applications. Maximal rejection of ambient side noises thanks to pronounced directivity. And because the MKE600 has a very good suppression of structure-borne noise, it makes one of the most versatile, all-round shotgun microphones on the market.
The new Super 35 sensor that Canon have introduced with the C500 Mark III is quite a big step up from other S35 sensors that they have created before. From the body and the flexibility that gives us in terms of the expansion packs and the interchangeable mount, to the sensor with its increased dynamic range for tackling scenes that possibly we couldn't have tackled or captured faithfully before, I can get more out of this camera. My money goes further. It's as simple as that from a business standpoint. From a creative point of view, it's unquestionably unlocking more creative avenues for us as filmmakers.